Hello everyone, it's Parisha from The Artistic Scroll, and in this tutorial we're going to learn how to draw this beautiful magic book in Procreate. So before we get started, here's what you'll need. Your iPad and pencil, the Procreate app, and the sketch file and color palette for the tutorial, which you can download for free from the Artistic Archive, which is my special vault of free resources that I've created just for you. So go ahead and download them now, and let's dive into the tutorial. So this is what the downloaded canvas will look like once you open it in Procreate, and as you can see, it's already got the sketch on layer 1, and we just need to change the background color. So to do that, let's go ahead and select this magic book color palette that you've downloaded and set it as default. Then move this color palette menu to the left, and then select this background color tab, and then choose this really dark purple color. And there you go, you can see your sketch finally better. And now we just need to go ahead and reduce the opacity of the sketch layer somewhere around 20%, and then rename this layer as sketch. So our task now is to go ahead and draw this gold case first. So create a new layer and then move this layer under the sketch layer. And let's go ahead and select the technical pen brush in inking. And with this gold color, we're going to start painting in the outlines of the gold case, and then later on we'll fill it in. Now, you don't need to try and get the outline all in one go. It's going to be really difficult because this is a stylized version of the book. So as you can see, it's got nice curves where curves shouldn't be. But that's what makes, these kind of illustrations so much more interesting in a way. So take your time, and as you can see, I'm also not trying to get all my strokes in just one go. I'm taking my time and just trying to follow the outline as best as I can. So do that, and later on, as I said, we'll fill it all in. And now just drag the color and fill it in. Great! Our next task would be to paint in the cover. So create a new layer and move it under the gold case layer, and then select this purple color. And let's just create a shape under the gold case. As you can see, I'm being very rough with the shape here. It doesn't really matter whether you can see it or not, as long as it's there. So just fill it in. Next, we're going to create pages. So create a new layer, move it under the cover layer, and then select the white color and again do the same thing, but this time just make sure that you're creating the outlines for the pages, as you can see now, properly. And then we'll go ahead and fill that in. Oh, but you can see I've probably not closed my shape here, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And that's it. Great. So that looks good. Next task is to create the straps. So we're going to create a new layer, but before that I just want to be able to see my purple color a bit better, so I've reduced the opacity of the cover a bit. So create a new layer above the gold case, and with the same purple color of the cover and the technical pen brush, go ahead and paint in these straps. Now it doesn't matter what size your brush is as long as you're comfortable with the outline. However you're able to do it. If you want, you can use a thicker brush for this, but as you can see, I'm going somewhere around, I think it's about between 6 to 8% from what I can see. It's probably around that much, but it really depends on what you're comfortable with. So fill that in and repeat the same process for the second strap. That's great, fill it in, looks good. Now we're going to create these gold embellishments. So create a new layer on top of the straps layer, and with the yellow color, go ahead and paint in the embellishments, or the buckles, or whatever you want to call it. I'm probably just going to call this strap gold, because it's just easier. So yeah, just go ahead and create these. And with these buckled and the gold bits, especially the ones that I'm painting in now, we just want to make sure that their edges are beyond the strap so that it looks like they have a more 3D structure to them and they extend a bit beyond the strap itself. So make sure you go ahead and extend them further like I have in the illustration. Okay, great. So our next task would be to create these swirls. Sorry, I don't have a different name for these, so you'll just have to get used to my terminology unless you're able to come up with one of your own. So we're going to reduce the opacity of the gold case so that we can see what we're going to draw a bit better. And then create a new layer below the straps layer. And with the same gold color and the technical pen brush, the size can be the same, like about 6 to 8% or whatever you're comfortable with. Go ahead and paint in the outlines of the swirl pattern, and then we're going to fill them in. Do let me know in the comments if you can think of a better name for this. It will be interesting to know what exactly we can call these. Bookends? No, they're definitely not bookends. Okay, so these look good. Next task is to create the stars. So we're going to create these under the swirls layer. So create a new layer there, and then reduce the opacity of the swirls layer so you can see exactly where we need to go ahead with the stars. And you have to see one thing in this illustration, there's going to be a lot of overlapping objects. So we'll just have to make sense of what is in front of which object here. So as you can see, the part that I'm drawing now in the star is actually behind the swirl, right? But this part now is actually in front of the swirl. So, however, the stars layer is actually below the swirl layer. So we're going to have to make some changes. We're going to have to erase some areas from the swirl. We're going to have to erase some areas probably from the stars layer as well. So we'll just have to use a bit of, let's say, spatial sense in a way to go ahead and create this in a more realistic manner for our illustration. So keep doing this. You can try and just follow the margins in some areas to make it easier. But yeah, I mean, we will have to erase a few areas. Like here we can just draw beyond, like around the margin, sorry, of the swirl. But in some of the areas we will definitely need to erase them. I'm just trying to see where we'll need to erase some areas. So it's a bit difficult, as you can see. Some of them are overlapping, but then we go back to the swirls layer and then we just start erasing some of the areas that you're expecting to be behind the star. But because the swirls layer is above the stars layer, it kind of needs to be erased from the star section for it to naturally show on our illustration, if you get what I mean. Because we'll be using clipping masks on top of these and we do not want any more trouble after that. And they're all going to be different in different areas. Like some areas, like you can see here, there's a bit of overlap section between the star and the swirl, so we're just going to erase that, because from our view here we know that this area of the star is in front of the swirl, so the swirl needs to be erased. I hope that's making sense. As you can see, that in that area the star is again in front, so the swirl needs to be erased in that section. And that looks good. Great, so we can increase the opacity again of both the layers. And now it's time to go ahead and paint in the gems. So our gems layer needs to be basically above the stars, because they're also in the corners, as you can see. So first of all, we're going to go ahead and create this central gem. So you can edit the shape as well and fit it into the margin. When you're satisfied with that, just go ahead and fill in the shape. Next, we're going to start with these. So our pattern here is that the central gem in all of the four corners is going to be pink or magenta, or whatever color you want to call that. And the other two ones are going to be blue. So let's go ahead and create those. And now select the blue color and paint in the other 2 gems in each corner. Now again, we're going to follow the same procedure of erasing some areas of the gem, the star, or the swirl, depending on what comes in front. So we're going to reduce the opacity and see, like in this area, we know that the gem will be overlapping and coming in front of the swirl. So we've erased that area. And we're going to repeat the same step for the others as well. So go back to your gems layer and paint in the gems for the other corners. And we'll go ahead and erase some areas of the swirl. So go back to the swirl layer. And you can see there's going to be a lot of back and forth in this. It's just the easiest way to do this, and it really helps develop your sense of awareness as to how to place objects if they are overlapping. And this is a very useful skill to develop as an illustrator. So try and work on this, and don't hesitate. If you make any mistakes, it's completely fine. Nobody's perfect in the first go, and these kind of skills take time to develop. So practice as much as you can, and then you'll see you'll start developing that eye, basically, to figure out where you're making mistakes and what does not look right. And that's what art's all about, isn't it? Just trying to emulate what you can see in reality in your own work, and then maybe put in your own style in it. So just go ahead and do that. Now, as you can see, our star is supposed to be in front here. So we're going to erase some part of the gems there so that our star can be more visible. And we'll do the same thing here as well. And there too. That looks good. So we'll increase the opacity of all the 4 corner objects, as well as the gold case. That looks great. So now it's time to create these bookmarks. So we're going to reduce the opacity of the pages layer a bit so we can see the bookmark sketch a bit clearly. And they need to be above the gold case. As you can see, they're overlapping. So create a new layer above the gold case, and then let's go ahead and select this purple color. And then with the same technical pen brush, go ahead and paint the outline of this ribbon. And again, the brush size is the same, 6 to 8%, more or less, whatever you want. We just want to be filling in these objects. Now we need to paint the border of this ribbon. So just going to tap on Alpha Lock and turn it on for this layer so that whatever we draw remains on this particular layer itself. So select the pink color now and then paint in the pink margin, the pink border of the ribbon. You can increase the size of the ribbon, the brush here, and yeah, that'll make it a bit easier for you to draw it all in one go. That looks great. Now reduce the size of the brush, turn off Alpha Lock so you can draw more on this layer, and we'll continue drawing the rest of the bookmarks. So with the purple color, we're going to draw the cord. And fillet it. Ooh, I'm having trouble with the threshold. So yeah, you can just do that to manage a threshold. Move it to the left without lifting off the pencil to reduce the threshold, and move it to the right to increase it. Now first create the pink bead and then the blue bead. And then with the gold color we'll paint in the charms. So let's create the moon first and then fill it in. And now we're going to create the cord, which will be gold, and this bead can be blue. And the first one here as well. And the second one can be pink. I'm just going to call it pink. It's probably not pink, it's more like pinkish purple. But just for convenience's sake, I'm going to say it's pink in the whole tutorial. So don't call me out on that later, please. It's just easier to say pink than pinkish purple all the time. And of course, then the star is gold. And then we bring back the opacity of the pages layer. And our next task is to paint in the pattern on the book's cover. So go back to the cover layer, and then we're going to create a new layer and make it a clipping mask. So next, choose this gold color again, and just start painting in these lines. Now I'm going to make this change a little later, but if you want, you can go ahead and do that now, because the technical pen brush sort of varies in thickness. So unless you're very consistent with the amount of pressure that you put on the screen with the pencil, you're going to have a bit of a wavering line with the technical pen. So to avoid that, you can basically just go ahead and use the monoline brush in calligraphy and put it down to the lowest setting so that it gives you almost the same thickness that you're having now with the technical pen brush, which is somewhere around, I'd say 9 to 10% if I'm not wrong. But using that monoline brush just gives you a very stable thickness. As you can see now with this circle, I'm trying to overlap, they are kind of varying in thickness, so that doesn't really work out very much. So to avoid that, as you can see here, either you can try and paint over it, or you can just change the brush, as I will now. Go to calligraphy, choose the monoline brush, and then make sure that it's at its lowest setting. As you can see, even at the lowest setting is quite thick. So, but it's consistent and uniform. So it's useful if you're trying to achieve uniform thickness. So that works. Adjust your ellipses or circles or whatever you want to call them. They're a bit in perspective, so yep. Right, so we're going to go back now to the technical pen brush, and then we're just going to paint in the rest of these rays. Okay, so that looks great. Our next task would be to paint in some more color to the cover. So create a new clipping mask below the gold pattern and then select this pink color. And then just these areas around the book, as you can see, we're going to paint in and fill in this pink color. Repeat the same thing on the other side and fill that in. And then we're just going to paint in the pink color here as well. I'm probably going to do this a little later on in the illustration, but you can totally increase the size of your technical pen brush here and paint it all in one go, rather than having to outline it like I'm doing and then filling it in. Yeah, there you go. I've just increased the size, and that makes it so much easier, doesn't it? So, like I said, it's totally up to how easy you want to make it for yourself or how difficult you want to. Play around with the brush sizes and get used to what works for you. So there you go. Now paint in this pattern on the spine of the book and fill it in. Great. So that's looking pretty good. There's a bit of a part that I've erased somewhere. Can't seem to make up for it somewhere, but we'll make the changes and edit that into place. All right. Next thing would be to create some sort of, let's say we're going to start working on the shadows for our gold case. So we're going to change the blend mode of the shadows layer to multiply. And then we know that with this brown color, we'll just go ahead and with the same technical pen brush. We know that some areas of the book will be in the shadow. For example, this vertical edge of the gold case. So paint that in first, and then this edge as well. The top edge is the one that will be facing the light, so we'll leave that as it is. But this darker edge gives it a nice volume as well, like a perception of depth as such. And these two sides of the book as well are in shadows, so our vertical edges here as well will be in shadows. So let's go ahead and just complete that shape. And we can continue this shadow on the spine as well. And then complete the shape and fill it all in. It's a bit too dark, so we're going to reduce the opacity somewhere around 40%. And there you go, that looks so much nicer, doesn't it? A pretty 3D effect there. So we're going to repeat the same process for all our gold embellishments there. So we're starting with the swirl, create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to multiply. And then again, all the vertical edges will be in shadows. So let's go ahead and paint them all in with the technical pen brush and the same brown color. I was under the impression that that part belongs to the swirl as well, but no, that's actually the gold case that I was trying to paint earlier. But yeah. paint in the edges, the vertical ones, and you can see it's starting to give it a nice effect of a 3D sort of object, which is exactly what we want to achieve here. Now repeat the same thing on all the 4 swirls. Let's go ahead and reduce the opacity of this layer to around 60%. And that looks great. I'm going to repeat the same process now for the stars as well. So select the stars layer and then create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to multiply. And then again, we're painting in the vertical edges with the same brown color and the technical pen brush. And again, the brush size is whatever you want it to be, whatever you're comfortable outlining it with. 5 to 8%. Fill it all in. Okay, so that looks great. Just reduce the opacity of this vertical edge layer to 60% again and increase the opacity of the gold case. Looks good. Now we're just going to select the soft airbrush, and then we just want to add some more proper shadows as such. So create a new clipping mask to the gold case cover and change the blend mode to multiply, and you see this edge. We're going to paint in some shadows there as well. Actually, we can return to the technical pen brush for this because we need strong margins, which we can't achieve with the soft airbrush. So just for this edge, which is supposed to be more interior than the rest of the part that is in the shadows, we're going to paint in this line, this edge of the gold case, which gives it a bit more 3D effect. Good. Now go back to the soft airbrush, and we're basically trying to paint in the occlusion shadows. So to make sure that we're only targeting this vertical edge layer, select that layer so that whatever we draw is now on that layer. So go back to our new occlusion shadow layer and start painting in some occlusion shadows with the soft airbrush. Mainly around the areas where you're expecting things to overlap, and you can even paint in a little bit of a shadow at the lower edge of this case, as you can see I'm doing here. Reduce the opacity of this layer to about 50% and then remove the selection. That looks good. Now you can just try and blend some of this shadow a little bit with the soft airbrush as your blending tool, and that looks pretty good. Now we're just going to create shadows for the top face of the swirls. So go back to the swirls layer and create a new clipping mask there. And then we're going to change the blend mode of that to multiply as well. And then using the soft airbrush and the same brown color, just around the edges of the top face of the swirls, paint in some shadows. Now you can play around with the brush size again. We don't want it to be too big, but just enough that it has a bit of a spread. So I'd say somewhere around 4 to 7% or even more, or whatever works for you again. You don't need to apply the shadows on all the areas, just where it looks like it's working for you. And just to avoid it going on to the vertical edge right now, we'll be blurring it later, but right now let's just omit those areas. So select the vertical edge layer and then you can tap on invert so that you can, when you return to your top face shadow layer and start painting on there, it doesn't impede or like have an effect on the vertical edge. So paint in all your shadows there along the edges. They won't be very visible because it's not going to be a highly reflective kind of gold embellishment or swirl, whatever we call that, in this illustration. You can make it a very shiny one with all kinds of details if you want, but that would make this illustration at least 3 to 4 hours long, and I don't think we've got the patience for that, at least right now, when we're still learning. So we're just going to keep things a little simpler this time. But you can obviously go ahead and try them all out, make them as detailed as you want on your end, if you feel like it. I'm going to stick with this for now. So paint in all your edges. And then remove the selection And then we're just going to apply some Gaussian blur to this to, we'll just say about 3%, not more than that. And it looks pretty decent. Yeah. So we're going to reduce the opacity of this layer to around 50%. And as you can see, it's very slight difference, but it still gives the effect that there's a bit of a curve here in this swirl. So happy with that. You can enhance these shadows a little bit. Again, by painting over them slightly. And yeah, especially around the edges. There in the curved inner surfaces, so that looks good. And you can blend these as well, the same soft airbrush as needed. Okay, so that looks good. Now, we just need to create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to multiply. What we're going to do now is create some more shadows along the vertical edges. So let's go back to our vertical edge layer and then select that so that whatever we paint is just on that layer. And then start painting in these vertical shadows. And these are more like, I would say, occlusion shadows, so whatever objects are there in front of them, there will be a shadow that will be caused by them. So we're trying to paint in those, especially around the curves and inner areas there. As you can see, like this area is getting a shadow from the gems and from the stars. And if you want to be very particular about all your lighting and shadows, the gems are likely to be giving off a reflection as well. And I haven't done that in this particular illustration, but you can always go ahead and add in some more additional lighting later on to show off your reflected light from the gems too. You'll understand what I mean by the reflected light a little later on when we add in the highlights for the gems. But for now, let's just concentrate on all of these shadows for the vertical edges of the swirls. So blend, blend, blend. And it's starting to look pretty good. We can always add some highlights to these vertical edges too. I haven't done that in this one, but it's totally up to you if you want to add them later on. Okay, so remove the selection now, and then reduce the opacity of this layer to 80%. That's looking good. So now it's time to add in some highlights. So we're going to select this vertical edge layer first so that our highlights don't go on this. Now create a new clipping mask, and then we're going to change the blend mode to add. And then we've still got the soft airbrush selected, and with this brown color first, just around the edges and the areas around the circular swirls, we're going to be creating our highlights. So paint in those highlights lightly, build up upon the painted areas with your brush strokes. So you don't need to apply a lot of pressure in the first go itself with the soft airbrush. And just paint in these edge highlights first. We're going to be applying a bit more central highlights in the next layer, but first let's just do these. Okay, and now we're going to apply a Gaussian blur to this as well. I need to go back and select that. Yeah, so Gaussian blur of about 5%, and yeah, we're going to go back to 5%, yes. And that's that, but we just need to apply central highlights now. So create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add, and this time we'll select this yellow color and paint in the central highlights, or the highlights in the areas that you think are most elevated, that'll catch the most light. And I'm really sorry if the whole footage is shaking a little bit. My camera stand wasn't the most stable for this recording. I did try, but for some reason it just kept shaking. So paint in these highlights in the center. As you can see, it's quite bright. It doesn't really need to be that bright. Like I mentioned, we're trying to make them a little less reflective as such. So reduce the opacity of this quite significantly to about 30%. And then we can even try and apply a Gaussian blur again of around 4% to that. And I think that looks pretty much okay. We can even reduce the opacity of the edge highlights to around 70%. And that gives it a more natural kind of a look. If you want a more reflective look, you can paint in some more highlights. But group all of these swirls layers together and then rename that group as Swirls. It's just to make your layer panel look a bit more organized and easier for you to navigate. Now we're going to add in some shadows to our stars layers. So create a new clipping mask there and change the blend mode to multiply. We're going to go ahead and paint in the facets of the top face of the stars to make them look a bit more 3D. So select the technical pen brush in inking and just follow my pattern here. Now the areas that are far away from the light are going to be darker, but still we need to try and maintain a bit of a 3D effect there. So one facet's going to be in light, one is going to be in the dark. So as you can see, I'm alternating between them, but dependent on where the lights are coming in. Now some of this area is actually gone over my vertical edge. So if you want, you can go ahead and just select the vertical edge layer of the stars and then tap invert on there, so that whatever you draw on your top facet shadow layer does not interfere. As you can see, I'm doing that now. Select that, invert it, and then return to your top facet shadow layer, and then paint in the shadows there. Okay, so this is looking pretty good now, but we just need to reduce the opacity to around 70%. And now it's just time to add in some more occlusion shadows to this layer as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new clipping mask, and then we're going to change the blend mode of that to multiply. And then with the soft airbrush, we're just going to go ahead and paint in the occlusion shadows in the areas which are in the corners. So first of all, select the top facet shadow area so that you don't go ahead with your shadows on anywhere else in the stars. And just start painting in some of these occlusion shadows in the corners, where you're expecting the least light to go in. And again, as you can see, if you're being very particular about all the lighting and everything, you can even eventually add in your reflected light from the gems in this particular area. So these, the ones that are next to the gems won't particularly have that much of an occlusion shadow, but we're just going ahead and not paying much attention to that. You can if you want. It's just going to add on more time to your illustration. But this is where we are. We're going to add some Gaussian blur, about 4% of that. Just blur out these shadows a little bit. And then because you've removed the selection, we want to just have some of these occlusion shadows on the vertical edge of the stars as well. So extend that a little bit by blending them onto the vertical edge of the stars, so you can give them a little bit more depth. You can even paint in a little bit more shadow with the soft airbrush, and yeah, and then you can just blend them out. Okay, so that's looking good. So now we just need to add in some highlights for the stars. So create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to add. And then with the same brown color selected, and we can go back to the technical pen brush. We're going to add in some highlights for the facets as well, and just a slight line highlight to the top edges of the stars. And then just outline these little areas and you can fill them in. And then just repeat this process on all 4 stars. And you can see I'm not having a definite regime for highlights on every single star. It's different with the position of the star. I'm just trying out different highlights and seeing what works. So you can either just try and duplicate the same as I am doing them, or see if it works better for you in a different way. Okay, that's good. Now apply a Gaussian blur again for around 3%. And we can reduce the opacity slightly to around 70%. And I think that's looking pretty good. There's a slight area here which I just want to refine a bit, so I'm going back to my swirls area a little later. Before that, let's just group all of our stars layers together and rename this group as stars. And that's great. So I've returned to my swirls layer here just to see which area is it that needs a bit of refining. So that looks a little sloppy there. So much better, isn't it? And we'll just repeat the thing for the stars thing as well. As you can see, that's a bit of an outline there that doesn't look particularly right. And that's much better. Now it's time to add in some more details to the straps. So turn on the sketch layer and then go back to your straps layer, create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to multiply. Now we're going to be painting in some shadows. So for that, firstly select the pink color, and then with the technical pen brush, we're going to create shadows for the vertical edge first. And then fill it in. Repeat the same thing for the second strap. And fill that in again. And now we're just going to create the general shadow there too. And fill that in. You could have totally done that in the first go itself, but I just think it's easier to be able to see our vertical edges clearly. And then remember, our gold embellishments are 3D too, so they're going to cast a shadow there too. And then reduce the opacity. And now we just want to create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode to multiply. We're going to be enhancing the shadows of the vertical edge and whatever we've got on the strap. So selecting the purple color, we don't really need to outline the entire edge here, the vertical edge. I'll remove that in a second. But what we really need to do is the areas that are further away, just need to enhance those first, like these diagonal edges, diagonal vertical edges. And that looks okay, but what we're trying to see here is our light's coming from below mainly, and also from the top. So in some areas the shadow is going to be on top. For example, here with the soft airbrush, just adjust your brush size to see whatever works. But because our shadow is going to be on top here from the gold buckle, but because there's light coming from the top as well, there's more of a shadow below the gold buckle here, or the top gold buckle. So create a shadow there. It's a bit of a difficult concept here, but if you just try and keep an idea of where your light sources are, it'll be easier to figure out. And of course, these little curved areas, those are in shadows for sure. So we're going to reduce the opacity of this occlusion shadow layer to 50%. Just enhance it slightly. And then create a new clipping mask. And then change the blend mode to add. We're going to add some highlights to our straps. So we've still got our purple color selected. And now with the technical pen brush, I'm going to create just some highlights around the edges. And then fill this area in. And then just very slightly, you can create some light lines along the edges, just to highlight them slightly. Not too much, and you don't need to have a continuous line there as well. Especially around the areas where you know you've got your shadows. And by the shadows I meant the occlusion shadows. Just like that. That looks pretty nice. And I'll reduce the opacity of this layer to around 40%. And then I'm just going back to our occlusion shadow layer, and with the soft airbrush, I'm just going to add a slight occlusion shadow to the lower edge of the strap, just for a little bit more of an effect. Okay, that looks good. Now return to the highlights layer, and now we're going to apply a slight Gaussian blur of about 2%, and that looks good. Now group all of these strap layers together, rename this group as straps. Next, we're going to work on the gold bits of the straps, so create a new clipping mask there, change the blend mode to multiply, and let's add some shadows to the gold parts. So with the technical pen brush and this brown color, and you can adjust the brush size as just about 6 to 8%, however works for you. Try and create some shadows there, which align with the shape of the buckle. So as you can see, it's a soft curve here that we're trying to achieve with the buckle. And our shadow for the top buckle is going to be on the lower end of that buckle, but for the lower buckle, it's going to be at the top end. So just repeat that same concept on the other strap too. And then reduce the opacity of this layer to 50%. Now add some highlights, so create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add, and this time we'll just go back to the soft airbrush. And just a slight highlight there. Highlights will obviously be on the opposite side of the shadows. That's looking good. Now turn the sketch layer back on so you can see exactly where everything is and is in place. Rename the strap gold layer as a strap gold group, and that's looking good. Okay, so our next task would be to add in some more shadows and dimension to our gold case. So create a new clipping mask there and then change the blend mode to multiply. And then making sure we've got the soft airbrush selected and the same brown color, we're going to add in some more shadows. And again, just build up your strokes with the soft airbrush. Don't need to be very, put a lot of pressure in the first go itself. And then remembering that the swirls on top, the straps, they're all 3D objects on top of the case. So they're going to have shadows of their own as well on the case, so which might be not directly under the object itself, might be slightly displaced as you would see in a normal shadow, like in reality. So we're trying to achieve that effect here by making them not follow the exact shape of the object on top, but slightly displaced, what looks more natural there. And just create a little bit of a shadow for the spine too. You can even enhance the vertical edge shadows slightly. Okay. You don't want to add a shadow right at the lower edge of that gold case because that's where the light source is going to be. So go ahead and apply a Gaussian blur now of about 5%. That's starting to look good. Now reduce the opacity of this layer to 80%, and then we're going to add in some highlights. So create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add, and we've still got our brown color selected. I've just noticed that there's an area that might need a bit more of a shadow, so we're going to return to that shadows layer and then paint in there. Just, I think that would be the shadow from the top edge of the cover. So return to your highlights layer now, and with the soft airbrush and the brown color, paint in the highlights on the opposite edges. And actually what you can do now is just paint in these highlights on all the edges of the book cover, as in the gold case cover. So because that's really going to make it look nice and make it stand out in a way, as you can see. And keep blending these slightly too as you go. You definitely do not try and create a straight line there. It's not going to work. You just blend in the highlights. Especially around the corners, you can create more of a highlight there at the corners. especially along the outer edges of the book. We want highlights to be concentrated there. And if you're very particular, because our glow from below the book is going to be a pinkish purple kind of glow, you can actually have another layer of highlights on top of this one, which is a pinkish purplish glow as well. So you can add that eventually later on. I haven't in this illustration, but you can definitely try that trick. It'll look much nicer. Okay, looking good. So turn off the sketch, have a final review of what it looks like, and then reduce the opacity of this layer to 70%. And once you're happy with all of those details, group all of these gold case layers together, and then rename this group as gold case. So now we are going to work on the gems layer. So create a new clipping mask and change the blend mode of this layer to multiply, and then turn on the sketch layer. Now selecting this pink color and the soft airbrush, just slightly outline the central gem first, and then create a bit of semicircular almost area there, and then apply a Gaussian blur of 4%. And once you've achieved this effect with the central gem, go back to the technical pen brush and paint in the vertical edge shadows of all the gems. Now there's a certain brush stroke there which I will amend later on in the illustration on my end. You probably don't have that, I hope. We'll just make all of these changes using the same color for the shadows as the gems themselves. So the blue gems will have a blue shadow, the pink gems will have the pink ones. Okay, so now create a new clipping mask on top and change the blend mode to multiply. We're going to add another layer of shadows. So starting with the central gem, change the brush to soft airbrush and then just lightly outline the central gem with the same pink color. And then using the soft airbrush as your smudge tool, blend it slightly. And for the rest of the gems, we're creating shadows on the top faces of all the gems. And slightly even creating a bit of an occlusion shadow on the vertical edges. And remember to blend them out too. And of course we're using the same colors as the gems themselves. Okay, that's great. Now we create a new clipping mask on top and change the blend mode to add. We're going to add a series of highlights and reflections here. So starting off with the central gem, we're going to continue with the same pink color, but now on the opposite end of the shadow, just create a small arc. And then apply a Gaussian blur of about 7%, so you get an effect just like that. And for the rest of the gems, just on the fullest part of the gem curve there, you can apply a small dot and then blend them in. Again, the size of the airbrush is really up to you. Whatever helps you achieve this kind of an effect. I don't want to be giving you specific numbers here for the sizes of the brushes, because then you'll just be trying to be very specific with that brush size. Whereas in fact, you can actually just see what works for you. So try and develop that skill there too, to be able to see what really does work for you and what doesn't. And that's looking good. Okay, so for our next step, we add another layer on top, so another clipping mask, and change the blend mode to add. Now we're going to add some white highlights there. So using the white color, slightly increase the brush size here, just so that you're able to form a curvature like that. One line at the bottom there, and then one curved line on the top of the central gem. Reduce the brush size significantly now. And then just try and form little curves here as highlights for the rest of the gems. These are very simple teardrop gems that we're going for. They're not having any sort of cuts on them or different facets, because that would seriously complicate this illustration, which we really do not want to go for, because this is a pretty long one in itself. But reduce the opacity of this layer to 80%, and then we're going to add one more final highlight layer. So change the blend mode of this one to add, and then this time go back to the technical pen brush and paint in this little circle. Well, ellipse, oval. And then for the rest of the gems, we're just going to reduce the size of the technical pen brush and then make slight lines just at the edges of the gems, just to delineate them a little bit. And then just apply a Gaussian blur of about 4%. Or actually, that's a bit too much in my opinion. I think we can go ahead with 2. 2% is good, but as you can see, we might be able to blend out this little white dot here a little bit more, and perhaps paint in a slight dot over it. And that looks like a really nice reflective gem, doesn't it? So let's go ahead and group all of these gem layers together and then rename this group as gems. That's looking great. Now it's time to work on the cover of the book. So create a new clipping mask over the gold pattern of the book cover, and then change the blend mode to multiply. And this time for the texture, we're going to go to textures in the brush library and choose the Tarkine brush. And selecting this pink color, just paint in this corrugated sort of texture. Now we want to make sure that this texture, these lines are in alignment with the shape of the book. So using the transform tool, just rotate it into position. And then we're going to apply the same technique with the spine as well. But it's probably going to select the entire book, the entire corrugated texture for the book, but we don't want that. We just want the spine. So select just the spine area and then rotate that into position. You might need to paint in a little bit extra texture, you can do that. But that's looking so much better. Now reduce the opacity of this layer to around 70%. And it's already looking like it's got a nice cover texture, doesn't it? Now create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to multiply, and we're going to add in some shadows to the book cover. So with the soft airbrush, we know that the spine is again as in the shadows as the rest of the vertical edges of the book. So just go ahead and paint in the shadows right there, create an outline and fill it in. Whereas the rest of the cover, because it's facing the light, the only shadows that we're going to get are going to be casted by the shadows, casted by the objects on top of the cover. So go ahead and paint in those shadows there with the soft airbrush. Along the edges of the book too. And the straps as well. Because there's a bit of a distance between the straps and the cover, your shadow will be slightly displaced. And that's looking great. We also need to add a little bit of shadow from the gem itself, the central gem, because it's sort of protruding from the cover, isn't it? So create a bit of an arc there. But because our gem is reflective, we want to add a bit more of a reflection highlight sort of an effect there. So create a new clipping mask and then change that blend mode to add. And just around the gem area, the central gem area, with the same pink color selected, we're going to paint in a slight glow there. That's looking good, but we might be able to just blend these out slightly in a bit. There you go. So that gives it a nice effect. Turn off the sketch layer and make any changes that you need to. But I think that's looking great. So now group all of the cover layers together, rename that group as cover. Okay, so next we're going to work on the bookmarks. So create a new clipping mask on top of the bookmarks layer, change the blend mode to multiply, because we're going to add shadows and then highlights later. So for our shadows first, select the soft airbrush, and then with the pink color, start creating the shadows on the ribbon. So the main areas of the shadows will be just around the edge where it's inserted in the pages, and then the curved area there. Okay, now we'll work on the charms there. So selecting the same color as whatever we've got on there, as in the purple cord, we use the purple color. If it's the pink and the blue gems, we'll use their native colors for the shadows. We've still got the soft airbrush selected. And then play around with the size of the brush and see what you can blend into place with the shadows to give it a bit more of a dimension, a bit more of a depth. And then selecting the pink color for the gem, create a pink shadow, and repeat the same process with the next gem. You can blend the shadow in as mentioned. And repeat the same thing while you've still got the pink color selected. Create a shadow for that gem too. Now select the blue color and work on the blue gems. I keep calling these gems. These aren't gems, they're beads. Sorry. So yes, go ahead and paint in the shadows on the beads. Okay, for the gold bits, we need to use the brown color. The reason we're not using the gold color in itself, the yellow gold color, is because it'll give a very orangey sort of effect instead of the darker color that we really want to achieve with our shadows here for the gold charms. So that's why we're using brown for all of the shadows on our gold parts here in the illustration. Remember, when your brush size for the smudge tool is bigger, it'll smudge a larger area. So if you want your smudging to be concentrated in just a smaller area, use a smaller brush size for that. And paint in the facets for the shadows, the shadows for the facets of the star charm. And similarly, try and create shadows for the moon as well. Okay, so now you know what it's time for highlights. So just before we go ahead and do that, just remember to blend in the shadow for the cord there as well. So create a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add, and now we're going to add in some highlights. So starting with the ribbon, select the pink color again and increase the size of the brush slightly and paint in some highlights around the curve and right at the forked edge of the ribbon. And then you can blend them in. It gives a nice shiny effect to the ribbon, isn't it? Now you can repeat the same technique of applying highlights to the rest of the bookmarks too. So remember, your highlights are going to be opposite to the shadow areas, and for the beads you just need a little dot, just like that. Nothing more than that. They don't even need much blending out really. I mean, what we've got there looks pretty decent. And for the charms, again, just try and highlight a little bit of the facets of the star. Leave some native gold areas there. And you can even try and create this reflected light from the gold charm onto the bead in front of it. That's exactly what I meant for the rest of the reflected light showing off from the gems in the corners, on the stars and the swirls, and the rest of the illustration. So group all of these layers together and rename that group as bookmarks. And now we're on our last bit here. Create a new clipping mask on the pages layer and then change the blend mode to multiply. So just that we can probably see our details for the pages a bit better, I've kind of played around with trying to see where we're going with the opacity, but what we're going to do is we're going to select our brush first. So in the charcoal section, choose the willow charcoal brush and paint in a grainy texture with the white color. So once you've done that, create a new clipping mask on top, change the blend mode to multiply again, and now you can probably see the details a bit better. So go back to the soft air brush, and with the same white color, we're going to create some shadows from the book cover onto the pages themselves. Then there are going to be shadows from the bookmarks on the pages too. And then we're going to try and make some delineations of the pages themselves as well. So paint in all of these shadows here. And then reduce the size of the brush a bit. Again, we don't want it to be too thick there, the brush size, so just enough that it looks like a slight line, like here. And just around the areas where you've got the bookmarks, create a little bit more of a shadow there. Okay, so just reduce the opacity of the sketch layer again, so you can see more clearly where exactly you've got. My lines are a bit too ragged there, so I just kind of want to be able to blend them out slightly. So I've used the soft airbrush again as the smudge tool, and I'm just going to blend these in slightly. As you can see, it makes them a bit cleaner, a bit straighter, because they're a bit too ragged there. And once you've achieved that effect, the shadows aren't that dark. I'm definitely sure we can go ahead and enhance the effect. So to do that, duplicate the shadows layer, and you can see it's definitely become darker now. So we'll make some changes to this later on in the illustration, but create a new clipping mask for now and change the blend mode to this to multiply, and then go back to the technical pen brush. We're going to be creating some pages there, page lines basically. So with the brown color, just draw in some straight lines, really reduce the size of the brush so that you get very fine lines. And try and follow the curvature of the book so that the pages where you expect to be a bit more curved upwards, they'll be slightly curved, like up there on the top right corner of the book pages. They look too much rigid at the moment, so I'm just going to apply a Gaussian blur of 2% to that, and then reduce the opacity of this book page layer to around 20%. Perhaps even increase it slightly. I think 20% is just too... you can't see anything there. So 45%, that works for me. So add a new clipping mask, change the blend mode to add. We're going to add some slight highlights. So using the white color, and then change the brush to soft airbrush, and just on top of some of these darker page shadows, paint in some highlights. You don't need to create highlights on top of every single one of those darker shadows. And then just blend these out as well. And then reduce the opacity of this layer to around 30%, so it looks a bit more natural. Just like I mentioned, I just want to be able to erase a few areas in the duplicated layer. So any of those duplicated layers, just use your soft airbrush as the eraser tool and erase some of the shadows there, as you can see. And that gives it a better look, I think. Otherwise the shadows were too striking against the white pages. That looks great. Group all of these layers together, rename this group as pages. We are done with the book. Can you imagine that? Finally. Now we just need to add in the glow behind the book, which will give it a whole magical sort of effect. So to do that, create a new layer and move it below the pages group. And we're going to go ahead and select the soft brush in airbrushing. It's a soft brush, not the soft airbrush. Yeah. And now we're going to select this pink color. And our main aim is to create a bit of a glow just behind just enough so that you can see the glow around the edges of the book. Not completely, we don't want it to go beyond this margin a lot, just enough as you can see. That's more than enough, because we'll be doing more layers around it. So this is enough for this first layer. Now create a new layer on top of this layer and change the blend mode of that to add. And now we're going to create a bigger circle there, basically. So with the soft airbrush again, paint in a larger central glow so that it extends beyond the first glow that we had. And it might take you a few tries to get that, whatever you're satisfied with. And then apply a Gaussian blur of around 25%. That's looking good. I want to add a bit more color to this though. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this layer, and then the top duplicated layer, turn on alpha lock for that. And then we're going to select this blue color and then paint in blue on top of that. You can see how now we've got a nice color dimension there. We've got pink and we've got purple, purplish blue. That looks great. So turn off the alpha lock there now. And just going to blend in this slightly so that it doesn't look so, like it smoothens out better as a gradient, as opposed to a striking circle edge. And I'm talking about the first central glow layer that we'd added on. Now it's time to add in the swirls, the glowing swirls. There's lots of swirls in this illustration, aren't there? So this layer needs to be below our first glow layer that we made. And now in inking, select the syrup brush. And then just paint in the swirls with this purple pink color that we have. And you can play around with the thickness of the brush strokes here. Try and make sure that the thicker edges of the brush, which can be achieved by applying more pressure on the screen, are perhaps more on the downstroke. As you can see in my illustration, they're more on the downstroke. You may need to go back and just draw over some areas if you're not able to get it in the first go, as you can clearly see I'm not able to. And that's completely fine. I mean, we've gone through so much in this illustration. We've worked through things again and again, and that's how you get better, isn't it? You can't expect everything to be amazing in the first go itself, so give yourself that space to revisit your first time mistakes, and that's fine. And I think that looks great. Now reduce the opacity of this layer to 60%. Want to add some more glow to that, so duplicate this swirls layer, change the blend mode of the lower duplicated layer to add, increase the opacity to max, and then apply a Gaussian blur of this layer to about 10%. It's got a nice glowing effect, doesn't it? And now, it's like my favorite part of the illustration, so we're going to create some magical dust. So create a new layer on top of all the glowing layers, change the blend mode to add, and select the light pen brush in luminance. And then go ahead and select this gold color and then paint in some of these magical dust as gold, and then later on you can alternate with the blue color and add in some of the magical dust as blue. So it gives a nice color variation there instead of just one color. So paint in all of this magical dust. Good. Now select the blue color and paint the rest of them blue. You don't need to use these exact same colors. Obviously, you can play around and use whichever ones you like better, because this is your artwork. That's great. Now apply a slight Gaussian blur of around 3%, 2 to 3%, and that gives it a beautiful look there. So group all of these layers together as glow. Great. We're just going to create a new layer below this layer now, because what we want to achieve is a nice gradient vignette kind of an effect. So change the blend mode to multiply, and with this background dark purple color and the soft airbrush selected, just around the edges, we're going to paint in this darker purple color. Just so that we have a nice gradient there, you know, where you've got the central glow and it's fading away into darkness. That's the kind of effect that we're trying to achieve here. And then apply a Gaussian blur to this to around 25% or more. I think that looks good. Just reduce the opacity slightly to around 75%. You can even blend these out slightly if that doesn't look perfect to you. There's no need for perfection though, don't waste your time in perfection, but I think it would definitely look a bit better if it's a bit blended out there. Yeah, I think that looks good. Just around this edge, I've noticed that for a final step, there needs to be a bit of a shadow of the bookmarks on the gold case as well. So return to that shadow layer, and with the brown color and the soft airbrush, paint in this little shadow there of the bookmarks. Don't forget details. They matter a lot. You definitely do not want to forget your shadows. Alright, so we're nearly done with this. Actually, we are done with this illustration. This was amazing. That's it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for joining me in this tutorial, and I really hope you had fun creating this magical book. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you liked the tutorial, and don't forget to get your sketches and palettes from the Artistic Archive. The link's in the description, and I'll see you in the next one.